So for those of you who don't know, we're talking about King David. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 18, and his son Absalom is leading a rebellion. His son Absalom is chasing David down at this point because he got some advice from two different advisors. One was Ahithophel. He gave really good advice, but David didn't listen to it. Hushai gave some other advice, but Hushai is like a spy. He's working for David. And he's like, hey, you should do this. And his advice was basically, make yourself look really good. Let David go for a little bit, and you build up a huge army, and then you lead them. Everyone will look at you. It'll all be about you. And he's like, I like that. This is a guy we're going to see that built a monument for himself, a living monument, which is usually monuments are built by other people after you die. But he's like, I want one now so I can see it. And so he had a monument built to himself. This is a guy, it's all about him. So to put him at the center of this epic story, he's like, yeah, that's better advice. I like that. Now he's about to go in there and try to kill his own father. And David is defeated. He's sad about the whole thing. It feels like kind of a lose-lose. Now, it's, as the title, if you were to see it on my sermon notes, creekside.me, you can go there, but it's a collision of love and justice. My mom and dad were good at justice. They had two different ways of doing it, and I'm speaking about spanking. My mom, she could just open the drawer at one point, and all of us would get silent, because that meant she's pulling out the wooden spoon, right? And if she had to, she could grab it and just hold it up, and we'd be like, whew. And I've told it before, but there was one time, I think on accident, she hasn't really clarified this, but instead of the wooden spoon, she pulled out the metal meat tenderizer. And that, for any kid, that's a really daunting instrument, because you actually don't know what that's for as a kid. You're like, that could be like what kids get when they're like super like bad. We haven't had that one. My dad was, he had to have known. But my dad, he would do machine gun spanks, which my mom would do 3. You'd get 3. And my dad, you'd get 48. But they were small. But he also, wasn't as diligent of looking. I could put, 3 magazines in my pants, right? It's like, Dad, do you really think that that's what I look like from behind? How do you not see that? And it makes a different sound. And so we knew how to kind of game it with my dad. Sorry, Dad. My mom, no. And she would do it every time. Pull your pants down, right? You get 3, your pants are down, and then she would say the same thing every time. This hurts me more than it hurts you. It's like, I don't think so, Mom. This does hurt a lot. And by the way, I'm the only one crying afterwards. But they did it, and it worked. It did work. And there were worse punishments. When you grounded me and I couldn't be outside and all my friends would come over, but I don't know if this was a thing here, but in California, we had a trampoline in our backyard, and my friends would come over and be like, can we jump on your trampoline? Even if I was grounded. So then I would go to the screen door and just watch my friends playing outside. And then I would go to my mom. That had to have been mental torture. It was probably on purpose. And I'd go to my mom like, Mom, can you just spank me? I'd rather that, 3 of them, pants down and everything. I just want to be outside. But that was justice. But it was also love there. And so that can happen. But what about when the justice requires something so severe that the love doesn't want to do it? And that's really the conflict that David is going to have with his own son. Do you know what the consequences of rebellion are? The Bible compares rebellion to witchcraft. It's like you trying to summon demons and work with the devil when you rebel. By the way, the punishment was death. And so David grappling with this idea of justice and this idea of love, but also with the internal shame that so much of this is his fault. This situation could have been avoided. Now, David will want to operate in love, but there is a bigger picture, and I want to remind you what it says in verse 14 of the last chapter. It says, "Then Absalom and all the men of Israel said, 'The advice of Hushai the Archite sounds better than the advice of Ahithophel.'" But now right here, "Now the Lord had decided to frustrate the sound advice of Ahithophel so that the Lord could bring disaster on Absalom." So no matter what David wants, the Lord has already decided. Now we're going to see it's honestly just one of my favorite parts because I don't even understand it. And it's so cool where you can see the Lord's activity in here where God acts and does despite humans. I want to get there. It's going to be in verse 8. Don't read ahead, that's cheating. Okay, here we go. "David assembled the army that was with him. He appointed leaders of thousands and leaders of hundreds. David then sent out the army, a third under the leadership of Joab, a third under the leadership of Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under the leadership of Ittai, the Gittite. The king said to the troops, 'I too will indeed march out with you.'" Here is, just this point is really good because David is realizing from his prior mistakes. In the Bathsheba story, it says, in the time when kings would go out to war, David was in the palace in Jerusalem. In other words, David didn't go out when he was supposed to, and then that led to the situation we're dealing with now. Because David saw a really pretty girl, she was bathing on the roof. He's like, "I want her." He took her, then he tried to hide it, but she got pregnant, and then he's like, "Oh no, what do? I got it, I'll kill her husband." And then so in private, he kills her husband, Uriah, and then he's like, "Oh, I'll save this damsel who no longer has a husband. I'll marry her." Okay, David. And then the judgment was exactly what we're experiencing right now, that there would be division in your house because of what you did. Now, you need to understand, I got a great opportunity to pray with several of my younger students back there that are here this morning. And my big prayer, especially for a lot of our young men, is that they would really grow up to be leaders, that they would grow up to be men of God, men who live with integrity, men who want to point others to Jesus. I want them to be candles. I see a lot of candles in this room this morning, but the cost of a candle is you consume yourself in order to warm and light the way for others. I want them to be candles, willing to consume themselves for the sake of a world that needs people sacrificing in the name of Jesus. That's what I want. But I also have to recognize that they'll see the bad in me too. And my son and my wife, they'll see that. And so I have to be really intentional about hoping and praying and being intentional about them getting the good. Like, hey, I want you to see the way in which I'm trying. Don't the ways in which it's bad, please don't emulate those things. So the problem for David is that his behavior, because he wasn't very good with his kids, unfortunately he wasn't. He wasn't a very good father. He was a great king, but not a very good father, is that they saw the worst in him and lived out the worst in them. And they just were not seeing the best of David, and so they were doing the worst of him. And now we have that situation starting in that way. But he wants to go out. Now, he doesn't. The reasons are different now. It says, but the soldiers replied, "You should not do this. Don't come out with us. For if we should have to make a rapid retreat, they won't be concerned about us. Even if half of us should die, they won't be concerned. But you are like 10,000 of us. So it is better if you remain in the city for support." Then the king said to them, "I'll do whatever seems best to you." So David wants to go out, but he does recognize that this is probably not the time. Now, if you remember, some of the advice that he heard was being passed around, especially by Ahithophel, was, hey, we're going to go in there and we're going to kill just the king. He's really the prime target. You kill the king here, you hopefully can unite Israel again. So they're like, no, they're out for you. You just stay back and we'll go ahead and fight this battle. And he says, okay, I'll do what's best for you. But he wanted to be intentional about being out there in the field because he knows that a lot of this is his fault and started because of a similar instance. It says, so the king stayed beside the city gate. Now you'll remember that when Uriah was recalled from war because David wanted to get Uriah to be with his wife Bathsheba so that he would think he got her pregnant, Uriah stayed at the gate. He's like, if I can't be out with my men, I'm not going to go be with my wife. Men are dying out there. I'll guard the gate. Now notice that David is like, I'm not going to be inside. I'm not going to be in a palace. I'm not going to be... now, again, they're not in Jerusalem, but he's not going to be in a tent. He's going to be at the gate. That's the center of life. I want everyone to be able to see me. That's where people hung out when they're like in a public place. So he's like, see my hands? Like I want everyone to see what I'm doing. I'm right at the gate. I'm going to be intentional. You know what? In our own lives, here's a principle. We need to be really intentional about the sorts of situations we put ourselves in. I am a chaplain at a school, and I'm not a chaplain just for boys. I'm a chaplain for girls too. And sometimes they'll want to come and talk to me, and I'm aware that optics really matter. And my position, I want to be really intentional about protecting my reputation. You have to be. Because even a rumor, as false as it may be, is so dangerous. So doors open, we sit right there in the open, right there where people can see. And it's not like I'm afraid, but I need to be above reproach. And so many people, frankly, in life will put themselves in bad situations and think, well, I'm strong enough for this, or I can handle this. And it's not. It's not good for you, and it doesn't end well for you. Like, don't put yourself in compromising situations. Don't watch things that get your mind into places that it should not be. Recently, I had a student, we were having a conversation about, secular music, and it was, when is it appropriate and when it's not? I said, well, what's your favorite song, like a secular song? And he gave me it, and I started to read the lyrics, and he's like, huh. Now when I hear the lyrics come out of your mouth, I don't know that that's maybe the right song to be listening to. Oh, okay. I mean, my mom says, sometimes you're not aware. Yeah, she listens to a lot of rap. She's like, I'm not even aware they're speaking so fast. I didn't know they were saying that. That's not true, just a joke. My mom doesn't, I don't know, do you? Late at night when no one's around. All that being said, you need to be intentional about the things that you're consuming, the things that you're putting in, because it does find ways of getting out. Jesus said that out of the mouth comes an overflow of the heart. What are you putting in your heart? All right. So David's at the gate. While all the army marched out by hundreds, by thousands, the king gave this order to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. For my sake, deal gently with the young man Absalom. Now the entire army was listening when the king gave all the leaders this order concerning Absalom. Now Absalom has already had, 3 sons and a daughter. He's not like a really young man. It's just, David is wanting to impress upon them, please bring my son back. Like, he's my boy. This is my boy. And so when you go out there, since I'm not marching there, I want you to know my intentions. And he says it publicly, so not just his generals hear it. He wants everybody to hear it. Don't hurt my son. That's the love of David that he wants to be expressed. And also probably another reason he would have liked to march out, to ensure that his son would be dealt with gently. Now the entire army was listening when the king gave all the leaders this order concerning Absalom. Verse 6. Then the army marched out to the field to fight against Israel. The battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. The army of Israel was defeated there by David's men. The slaughter there was great that day. 20,000 soldiers were killed. The battle there was spread out over the whole area. Now listen to this. And the forest consumed more soldiers than the sword devoured that day. What? So they're in this battle, they're in this forest, and the sword, 20,000 people died. Okay? You would think the sword is how they died. No. Way, way more died from the forest consuming them. Now, I don't know if this is like Lord of the Rings type thing, right? Where Treebeard popped out and was like, boom, right? Kind of wild, that would be cool, right? Or did they consume? It was like a tree and you're like, that's a big knot there. And then it's right? I don't know what happened. And it's not like, a lot of people fell and broke their necks. In some much later translations, in order to make sense of this, they're like, I don't know, they died from wild animals in there. Like, they were eaten by animals in there. Or, now, there is actually a parallel verse to this in the sense that it says a very similar thing in Joshua. Now, Joshua conquered the land that was the promised land. He's the one who did the walls of Jericho and got those to fall. Well, he was fighting the Amorites. And this is what it says in Joshua 10:11. As they fled from Israel on the slope leading down from Beth Horon, the Lord threw down on them large hailstones from the sky, all the way to Azekah. They died. In fact, more died from the hailstones than the Israelites killed with the sword. We're intended to read this as God using the forest to consume the soldiers. When the Lord decides, he gets it done. God has already decided he would bring destruction on Absalom. He did not need those soldiers. Look, he could have done it with the forest. Imagine getting chased by a tree. That would be so wild. Roots just come out and drag you. I had no chance in this. Right? You just give up. If I'm getting attacked by roots, I'm going to be like, I'm on the wrong side of this war. And so we are intended to see God's provision by these soldiers being consumed by the forest. Now, I told you last week, and I want you to hear it again, that God does not need your resources. He just needs your obedience. So in this, it's obvious here that in obedience, these soldiers are saying, look, this is God's anointed king. Our calling is to protect the king. We're going to do that. We are outnumbered, and David is outnumbered. It doesn't matter because the forest came to the rescue. He doesn't need your resources. He wants your obedience. And we see it lived out here in this moment. So really famous story. Many of you will have heard this before. but it's of a woman named Ellie Lobel. Now, when she was 27 years old, got bit by a tick. She got Lyme disease. And for years and years and years, she was dealing with just increasing ailments from this. And it got so bad, her organs were failing, that she moved to California specifically because of doctor-assisted suicide there. And the doctors actually said, look, your body is failing. You don't need us to do anything. Why don't you just go out to the coast and just spend 3 days sort of letting your body give up, and you'll probably just die. I mean, that's how dire this was. She had given up. Like everything, her health issues, at this point, she's 43 years old, and it was done for her. So she walks and goes on this walk because it was going to be her final, look at the world as she's trying to just sort of let herself go. And when she was a kid, she'd been stung by a bee, and she went into anaphylactic shock. And there was a bee that landed on her. So she kind of was like, oh, then another. And then she got swarmed by Africanized killer bees, and she got stung over 100 times. So she laid on the ground saying, I mean, that's one way to go. Like, I was kind of giving up. I didn't think it would end like this. She's laying there, and then she's like, why am I not dead yet? She gets up. She goes home. Why do I feel better? Like, I just got stung 100 times. And turns out that all of the venom in the bees destroyed the Lyme disease. Destroyed it. And now doctors knew that there was some possibility there, but they weren't going to test it on somebody. What if we just bring him in a room and have him get stung 100 times? And we'll just see. Right? It's like, who's signing up for that? Like, I guess I'll try it. How many times? 100. No, but all of that, and to the point where she did her own bee sting treatment 3 more times after that, and then it was completely done. There was not any left in her. But this idea of God can use the bees, right? God can use the forest. He can chuck hailstones down at people. When God is calling you to something, victory has already been decided. And our objective is just to give him our obedience, because trust me, he's not asking for your resources. He can do it without you. But sometimes we feel under-equipped, we feel incapable, we feel like we don't have enough. The good news is you don't. You don't have enough. God's calling you to it because he has enough. He is enough. He's all that you need. And so I love this part of the story here, because I don't even know what it looks like. But that's the point. In my obedience to God, I might not know what it looks like for him to claim victory in my life. I know it's already claimed, but I just don't know what it looks like sometimes. I just need to do. I just need to do what he asks me to do. You know, part of my ministry, I just go and I go and I go and I go and I go. And sometimes it's like, man, I'm getting really tired. But if it weren't for the fact that I have been so many times at the end of myself and I've met a God that always has enough for me. Empty is just an opportunity to be filled by someone who fills to overflowing. And when I go to empty, all I know is I'm running into a God who is infinite, who is all-sustaining, who has more than I will ever need. And so this vision here to me is really cool, that just the trees are doing the work. And then let's read to the unfortunate demise here. I wanted a principle for it. My principle might be like, don't ride mules into trees. But, I mean, you can think of your own. I'm not sure how to swing this one. But it says this. Then Absalom happened to come across David's men. Now, I like how it says happened. Like, obviously, there's a lot of chaos happening in these trees, right? If like chaos is happening everywhere and you're like, oh, David's men, I happened across you. Now, as Absalom was riding on his mule, it went under the branches of a large oak tree. His head got caught in the oak, and he was suspended in midair, while the mule he had been riding kept going. I mean, that's straight out of a movie, right? Like the mule's like, see you later. These trees are wild, right? And the mule just goes. By the way, kings would ride mules. This was not uncommon. It's not that it's like that's all he could get. They were very sure-footed, strong. So it was really a kingly mount. But this, he rode into this tree and he got caught. Now, most people think that it was his hair, and it doesn't say hair specifically, but there is some seeming foreshadow in prior verses because it talks about his hair being so heavy that it weighed 3 pounds whenever and anywhere from 3 to 5, depending on the weight that you use, but every year that he would cut it. Long, beautiful hair. It said, man, his hair was so beautiful. And now the thing that he probably took a lot of pride in is like, man, I'm hanging in a tree. My mule's gone. Now, some versions will say, and this is what it literally says in the Hebrew, that he was suspended between heaven and earth. What a cool way to say it. Like, my feet aren't on earth and I'm not going to heaven. And he's just stuck, totally at the mercy of the people around him. But don't worry. You remember what David said. Have mercy on my son, the young man Absalom. So, of course, that's what they're going to do, right? When one of the men saw this, he reported it to Joab. I mean, this guy's stuck. Obviously, because he's like, I just saw Absalom in a tree, and I have enough time to go and report it to somebody and just watch him in this tree, right? You'd think you could get out. Like, if you got stuck in a tree, like, give me a few minutes, I'll probably get out of it. But he is stuck. So that mule must have been going fast. Really got wrapped up in there. So he reports it. Joab replied to the man who was telling him this, "What? You saw this? Why didn't you strike him down right on the spot? I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a commemorative belt." Now, for you guys, you're like, a belt? Why do you give me a belt? That was huge. Only commanders or really respected people would get like this war belt. It would be like a UFC belt. Like that lets you know you're a big deal, right? A WWE belt for Jared out there, WWF or the other wrestling that is different. Yeah, I don't know what it's called these days. So belt was a big deal, and it wasn't a small amount of money, but the guy says, the man replied to Joab, even if I were receiving 1,000 pieces of silver, that's like hyperbole. Even if you were giving me $1 billion, I would not strike the king's son. In our very presence, the king gave this order to you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. If I had acted at risk of my own life, for my sake, if I had acted at the risk of my own life, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have abandoned me, which is probably true, right? Like, I would have killed him, and then you would have been like, what'd you do? And you would have just thrown it on me, so don't even pretend like you would have rewarded me. Joab replied, I will not wait around like this for you. He took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them into the middle of Absalom while he was still alive in the middle of the oak tree. This is uh, it's called an antanaclasis, and it's in language. It's when you use a word in two different ways in the same phrase. Because if you're reading a more literal translation like ESV or NASB, it'll say that Joab struck him in the heart. But he's going to still be alive. If you want to know this, if you take 3 spears and stab somebody in the heart with 3 spears, they're dead. But heart means, in that language, the middle. You would just say the heart, but it actually says that he stabbed him in the heart while in the heart of the tree. And so you use these different phrases, and so it's more of a creative phrase that is intended to mean while he's in the middle of the tree, he's also getting stabbed in the middle. And so that's why the NAT translated it that way. And I'll actually say this just for your own sake, because I'm not a translation snob. Like, I can look at different translations. I've been formally trained in the original languages, so if we really need to, I can go and see what it says in the original languages. But I like to see kind of how different translations will treat this. And for your own edification, just so you can know, this will be a little class session here. When you're doing a translation, you'll have 3 different philosophies. You'll have what's called a word for word, or on the other end, a thought for thought. And then you'll have this middle way translation called optimal equivalence. So if you're word for word, it's called a formal equivalence translation. It just means we want to find exactly the word that is equivalent to this word every time, word for word. Now, a thought for thought says we want dynamic equivalence. We want something that gets the same meaning across every time. Because if you literally translate word for word certain idioms that come from a different culture, you won't understand it. I mean, I've done this all the time. Every time I have a exchange student in my class, I like to illustrate this, because I'll say something like, one we had recently, her name was Megumi a few years ago, and I said, "Megumi, it's raining cats and dogs." She goes, "No." So, "Yeah, it's raining cats and dogs." She's like, "Why are you saying that?" It's like, that's dumb. It's not raining cats and dogs. It doesn't matter. Even if I went over to a translation and I put that into Japanese for her, it would say it's raining cats and dogs in Japanese. And she would say, "Still stupid." So a thought for thought is going to say, okay, it's raining torrentially, or it's raining really hard outside. And she'd be like, "Oh, I get that." But a word for word is going to say it's raining cats and dogs, and just translate it that way. So a word for word, sometimes you can get exactly what it says, but not understand the meaning as much. And that's why a thought for thought tries to do that. But then a thought for thought can be interpretive. And so that's where the optimal equivalence is. The shout out to the NET, it's what I use. It's saying we're going to use word for word most of the time, and then we'll do sort of dynamic equivalence on those idioms in order to make sure that meaning is still retained. That's just for your own, put it out there. That's not some sermon point. But probably the most famous example of this in history is when Ben Franklin said, "If we don't hang together, we'll hang separately." And his thing was like, we need to be united or we're going to actually hang. That was a phrase of that same type that you see here. The next point that I want to point out here, and we see it right here, because Joab just did 3 right into his middle, and I want to read to you what happens after, and then I'll go to the next point. But it says this. Joab replied, "I will not wait around for you," stabs him. Then Joab blew. Oh, no, I missed it. I'm sorry. He took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them into the middle of Absalom while he was still alive in the middle of the oak tree. Then 10 soldiers, who were Joab's armor bearers, struck Absalom and finished him off. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the army turned back from chasing Israel, for Joab had called for the army to halt. They took Absalom, threw him into a large pit in the forest, and stacked a huge pile of stones over him. In the meantime, all the Israelite soldiers fled to their homes. This is the monument part. Before this, Absalom had set up a monument and dedicated it to himself in the king's valley, reasoning, I have no son who will carry on my name. He named the monument after himself, and to this day it is known as Absalom's Memorial. So in the Bible, in Galatians, it tells us that you reap what you sow. And it's interesting here because Joab is correct, but he isn't right. He's correct in understanding that it's really dangerous if Absalom were to live, that Absalom, by all accounts, deserves to be killed for his rebellion, that if he's let to live, that this is just kicking it down the road, it will probably happen again. So correct in that it's a good idea. Wrong, or not right, in the sense that he's disobeying the king and he shouldn't do that. Now, my son is good at these sorts of excuses, where I will ask him to do something, and when he doesn't do it, his justification is he was doing something else that I would like, right? I didn't clean my room because I was doing the homework that I have to get done. You know? And he's good at it already. Already. So good at I know you like this. Now, because I like that he reads, he'd be like, Dad, I didn't do that because I was trying to read this and finish this. And I have to say, I'm glad that you read, but that's not what I asked you to do. And 2 Samuel, let me read the Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived. God will not be made a fool, for a person will reap what he sows. And then it says in Matthew 26:52, then Jesus said to him, put your sword back in its place, for all who take hold of the sword will die by the sword. In other words, if you don't know this story, when Jesus comes to get arrested, Peter jumps out and cuts a guy's ear off. And Jesus is like, what do you do that for? If you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. He says, don't you know that if I needed, I could call down 12,000 angels? I don't need you. I'm doing this willingly. And this idea for us is that if we are living in sin, we will have the consequences of sin. If we are not treating people the right way, we're going to have the consequences of bad relationships. All of this, everything that David is experiencing in this moment is the consequences of his prior sin. All of this. The rebellion itself was an inability to reconcile in the way that he should. It says this in James 1:14-15. But each one is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. Then when desire conceives, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is full grown, it gives birth to death. This could have been stopped early in that process. But Absalom was bitter and angry, and it brewed, and it brewed, and it brewed. And then he wanted to make a name for himself. I'll end on this one, and we'll finish chapter 18 next week. But there's a crucial point here. All of this happened because Absalom was putting Absalom first. And Abraham and David got a very similar call from God, and you have the same one. Who is establishing your name? Is it you or is it God? Because if you follow your own way in order to try to leave yourself the legacy that you want, and you are not living for God so that you can leave the legacy He wants for you, it won't end well. You'll reap what you sow. It says in Genesis 12:2, this is God talking to Abraham. and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Similarly, in 2 Samuel 7:9, it says, and I will make you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. Now, it's obvious that Absalom's sons that he had are dead because he doesn't have anyone to leave a legacy for, right? I don't have any sons, I have no heir. So he builds a monument for himself. This is Absalom's desire to make his name great. He rebelled. Now he's hanging from a tree. His father wants mercy. But he gets to experience what rebellion feels like. Joab disobeys the king in his own rebellion and stabs Absalom to death. His rebellion ended with rebellion. His rebellion ended at the hands of rebellion. And in our own lives, if we are not intentional about how we live with other people, I promise you they will see that in us. If we are not intentional about the way that we live as lights for Christ, they're going to see that in us. And you have people that are looking at you. You have people that may be looking up to you. You have people that may one day want to be like you. And I promise that if you are living in the way that Jesus wants you to live, they will see the right things in you. And that's how we want to live. And I want to get to this because there's a really cool thing at the end of this where we get to see a real big parallel to the cross of Jesus. And so I hope you'll join me next week so I can finish 18. But let me pray this into your life, that we would be people who intentionally live for Jesus and who are reaping what we sow. And we are reaping the good things of Christ, because that's what we're sowing. Lord Jesus, I just pray that everyone here would be changed by you. God, we want more of you in our lives. We want less of us. God, we pray that the things that we are sowing in our lives are the things that you've given us. God, we want to sow the good things of Christ. We want to speak what is yours. God, and when we get it wrong, help us to be people of repentance so the world will also see our repentance. God, we want to be people who follow hard after you. Help the fathers here, God, to be good to their sons. The mothers here to be good to their sons. God, help the fathers here to be good to their daughters. Help the mothers here to be good to their daughters. We just want to be people who are looking at our children, are looking at the future and wanting the best for them, praying the best for them, God, that we don't want to be like David in this way. We don't want to get to a terrible moment and realize there's no going back. God, help us to be intentional in the relationships we have right now. God, we thank you so much that your word is living and active and speaks today. God, I pray that it would speak to us. God, that it would be something that goes deep into our very bones, and it would make us want to even break for you if we must. God, I pray that we would be people who are willing to consume ourselves in order to be a light to a world that desperately needs it. God, help us shine brightly for you. Help us to live actively for you. Help us to be your church, your bride. God, I just thank you for everyone here gathered in this place this morning. Help us to be intentional about prayer. God, we just want you to fight our battles. Help us to see the victory that you've already assured for us. And we love you in your precious name. Amen.